But that's so much for last time. Now we're ready to go on to this time. So, and that is, have in the back of your mind, how is possible that people could recognize, could know the illumination in the room, that is the understanding of being that's transparent. It has to be transparent and withdrawn for them to experience anything. How could they become aware of their own? It's easy enough to say, we recognize the style of the medieval Christians, we see the Christian world, we see the Greek world, but Heidegger has lots to say about the modern world and the postmodern world, and how does he manage to do that? So, the answer is in the work of art. Yeah?
Can I ask a question about that? Is it presumed that he's seen definitely?
Not presumed, he's got to make the case, but and the way he'll make the case is, can you close that? Yeah, he will find, do I want to say this yet? Well, why not? I will blurt it out and then I will spell it out in great detail. It's Heidegger's thesis that there are certain entities which are such perfectly convincing, he would say shining, you could say glamorized examples of the style, that they hold it up for everybody and everybody can see it because they can see them shining, so to speak. Think of to have a feel for this, I'm sort of jumping in way, not quite where I would normally jump in, but wait, let's have a stop for a minute. You guys over in Wilford maybe or something? I see anybody else over there? Good. We have to stop because it's our fault that you were wandering around like this. Have you got a syllabus already? You need a syllabus. Okay, there's a syllabus. Also, take these are the times for the discussion sections. Take where do we have more of these? Forrest will give you things to fill out. Okay, we have to have a break here while Forrest gives everybody who's taking the course and who hasn't got a discussion section thing to fill out. Give them one, and then just sit down. Walk over people if you have to, although there are a few seats you don't have to walk over people. Okay, to blurt out a sort of phenomenon, which will be a kind of refrain in the background. My favorite example, there is something like the style of being feminine in the 60s, or 50s, really, the 50s, I think. And you could say that Marilyn Monroe exemplified it, glamorized it, made it shine. I take it that that's why she's called a star, is that she shined. And held it up to people so that they could see their style and imitate her and thereby further that style. So now we want to sort of generalize. Are there things that have the job of glamorizing and holding up to the people the style of their world so that they can all not only have it, but they can see it, and they can see that everybody else sees it, and see that they have it in common. That's what the origin of the work of art is about. But now let's take a backward move and go slowly through it. There's a special kind of artwork that performs this very special function that we're going to talk about. It's important to realize that it only confuses you if you think that Heidegger's trying to give you some kind of definition that applies to all artworks, paintings and poems and so forth. It only applies to a very few special artworks, and he doesn't care about that. He's interested in what an artwork can do when it is working at its best. And even the Van Gogh shoes story at the beginning is very misleading, because Van Gogh's shoes don't do this job that he's going to be talking about. They don't hold up to anybody, so to speak, what the style of the culture is. They don't even hold up to the peasants what the style of the peasant life is, because they're hanging in a museum. And he typically says that works of art aren't working when they're hanging in museums. So it's all sort of misleading until he finally gets to where he really is interested. I take it the reason he does it in this peculiar way, which is that he starts with artworks that are not examples of artworks at their best, working in their most unique way, and that he starts with artworks at all, because artworks turn out to be a special case of what he's talking about. We'll get to that this time or next time, is because this happens to be a lecture given at the Bavarian Art Academy, which sort of skews everything around in a very misleading way. So I'm going to sort of reconstruct it the way it would be if it was not given it. Well, no, not quite. I have to stick with what's there, but I'm going to try to put the emphasis on where it belongs, which means skip over the part about the shoes altogether. The shoes aren't works of art at all. They're things thinging. But Heidegger doesn't know what it is for things to thing at this stage in his career. But when we get to the things thinging later, we can go back and look at the shoes. They do a perfect job of that. But they are not artworks. Okay. But now I want to lead into this. Heidegger's not the only one who's seen the phenomena that we want to talk about. And of course, as I say every once in a while in every course, you've got to have a phenomenon. You've got to keep your eye on what he's talking about. Otherwise, you just recycle his weird vocabulary, and you don't have any way to criticize it, like saying, yeah, but that's not typical case, or that's not the right way to describe the phenomenon. I'm answering the one who said, do we have to just believe what Heidegger says? No, we don't have to believe what Heidegger says. We can do our own phenomenology to criticize it or supplement it or whatever. So Heidegger has got a phenomenon here. He's probably the first to see it. If anybody knows of anybody before Heidegger who's seen this, let me know. He's certainly seen it with more depth and more ontological resonances than anybody. But let's do people who've seen it and who've said it in more simple terms in various domains. The only ones I know about are Clifford Geertz in anthropology, Geertz in the interpretation of cultures. How many know this book? It's a famous book. Not so many. Okay. So we've got Geertz. I'll read you the part that you need to know about. I'm going to read you passages. Will you go over in Wolford too, or lost somewhere? Yes? Okay, well, we have to take care of these people who, you need a syllabus? Are you taking the course? More syllabi. Have we run out? No. Good. We'll stop again. I'm going to turn this off this time. Well, no, I better not. I don't have to turn it on again. Okay, syllabi, and also, please, if you're taking the course, we're going to give you a section thing. Even if you filled one out last time, fill out another form in which you say which of the sections you want to be in, and which times you can't come. And again, rhetoric students are advised to get in the forest section if that fits with their schedule. Okay, now, so Geertz wrote a very famous paper called Notes on the Balinese Cockfight, which is in this collection, The Interpretation of Cultures. He does what people call hermeneutic, that is interpretive anthropology. He's the sort of leader and founder of that movement. And I'm going to read you some quotes. Because the Balinese cockfight turns out to be, in some very important ways, like what Heidegger means by a work of art, and in other very important ways not. And it will help us to see exactly what Heidegger is talking about. He says, an image, a fiction, a model, a metaphor. The cockfight is a means of expression. Its function is neither to assuage social passions nor to heighten them, but in the medium of feathers, blood, crowds, and money, to display them. So the first thing he sees is that there is this game, it's a very important game that the Balinese men play, and that something there is displayed or shown. But it's not just shown. Let's read more. It is a meta-social commentary on the matter of assorting human beings into fixed hierarchical ranks, and then organizing the major part of collective existence around that assortment. Its function, if you want to call it that, is interpretive. So it's not just displaying, it's interpretive. It is a Balinese reading of Balinese experience, a story they tell themselves about themselves. I'm going to read more. Attending cockfights and participating in them is for the Balinese a kind of sentimental education. That is, it educates their sentiments. While what he learns there, the Balinese man, and only men are in it, that's important for a difference between Heidegger and what Geertz is talking about. What he learns there is what his culture's ethos and his private sensibility, or anyway aspects of them, look like when spelled out externally in a collective text. And one more important point, it isn't just that the cockfight then copies something that's already there. It, in a certain sense, produces something. He says quartets, still life, and cockfights, notice the works of art that get mixed in with the cockfights, are not merely reflections of a pre-existing sensibility, analogically represented. They are positive agents in the creation and maintenance of such a sensibility. Well, if sensibility and ethos, remember, equal style, I read you a quote from Geertz last time saying that. So now we're told that there are certain, let's call them objects. I don't know, events, objects. They're sort of rituals, maybe. Let's call it a ritual. It isn't exactly a ritual. But there's certain something or others, anyway, that have the job of creating and maintaining something like the style. And note that such works aren't copies. They don't represent something that's already there. But they don't create something ex nihilo either. They have some other kind of function. They, what we want to say is something like articulate, or sharpen up, or focus, and hold up to people. Something which is already going on, but it isn't going on as intensely as it's going to go on once it gets sharpened up and held up to the people. Geertz says this, he says, it is this kind of bringing assorted experiences of everyday life to focus that the cockfight accomplishes, and so creates what better than typical or universal could be called a paradigmatic human event. Well, paradigm is a terrific word for this. That's a fancy word for the glamorized I was using earlier. Something which is not just a typical case, but the best case. That's what it is. A paradigm case is he sometimes uses the term exemplar. As you may know, it comes from grammar, where you get a paradigm is spelling out a verb, and you take the most regular, most typical verb for your paradigm. So one of the ways to think of this then is that there have to be what we could call cultural paradigms that do this job of interpreting and articulating, focusing a culture. Now, another person who sees this is Charles Taylor. I won't read you his passages, but in a very important paper of Charles Taylor called Interpretation and the Sciences of Men. I don't think he got it from Heidegger. I don't have any evidence, but he seems to have figured it out on his own. Taylor may well have gotten it from Heidegger, although he doesn't say so. Taylor he's good at phenomena. He talks about intersubjective meanings, and he says the intersubjective meanings are shared ways of responding to things. He gives an example. He says we all may have a certain understanding of feminine beauty, but and we respond to feminine beauty according to our sensibility about it, but it may be totally unknown to everybody. But he says, except to the people who make advertisements, who may have figured it out, are playing upon it, even though we don't know about it. But and that would be his intersubjective meanings, a very bad word, by the way. I'm surprised at him for taking that, because they're not subjective and therefore not intersubjective. They're not mental at all, if my story, the sort of Bourdieu Merleau-Ponty story is like. They're in the habits and practices, but they're interpeople meanings anyway. And then he says, but there also have to be common meanings. Common meanings for him are examples that hold up to the people what they're up to. So he's from Quebec. So for the Quebecois, the slogans about free and independent Quebec and French as the national language, and so are common meanings that the Quebecois all accept as expressions of their identity. I mean, of course, I would have said, let's follow through on the feminine one and think back to Marilyn Monroe. I mean, it may have been unclear up to a point what the intersubjective meanings of feminine attraction were, but when she came along, she made it a common meaning. Women could understand how they should be looking and behaving in the light of Marilyn Monroe, and men could understand sort of what form of feminine beauty attracted them in the light of Marilyn Monroe, and then this intersubjective meaning becomes a common meaning. Now, the person who's got this most figured out, and interestingly enough, though Taylor doesn't use the term paradigm, the famous use of paradigm is in this. How many read The Structure of Scientific Revolution of Kuhn? Not so many. The most read book of any academic book ever published. At least they sell the most out of it. I suppose that it's very readable. I recommend you read it just for fun, for information, and for this course. It's easy to read it, very easy. And he's got a totally Heideggerian feel for all these things, so he's never read a word of Heidegger. Every time I met him, I always said to him, read Heidegger. Yes, yes, and he did. But he died recently. Okay, I'm going to read you a lot about Kuhn, because what Kuhn says about paradigms is so helpful in understanding the role they play that Heidegger and Geertz and Taylor are all onto in various ways, that it's just worth hearing about it. Okay, paradigms for Kuhn. Kuhn is only interested in science. He's a historian of science. So we've had an anthropologist, we've had a philosopher, Taylor, now we've got a historian, all seeing this from their own angles. He's discovered, and he's famous for this, that what he calls paradigms play a crucial role in science. He says, I'll give you pages in this, page 43, close historical investigation of a given specialty at a given time discloses a set of recurrent and quasi-standard illustrations of various theories in their conceptual, observational, instrumental application. These are the community's paradigms. It's so interesting to me that Kuhn and Geertz should just come up with that word. Maybe Heidegger would have if he was writing in English. They are the community's paradigms revealed in its textbooks, lectures, and laboratory exercises. By studying them and by practicing with them, the members of the corresponding community learn their trade. That is, they pick up not only the intersubjective meanings, but the common meanings of, say, being a Newtonian scientist this way. Or on 175, he says, he talks more about paradigm, and he discovers the difference between common meanings and intersubjective meanings. He says, people have pointed out that in this book, the term paradigm is used in two different senses. On the one hand, it stands for the entire collection of beliefs, values, techniques, and so on shared by the members of a given community. Are you getting used to this? That's the intersubjective meanings of Taylor. That's what being in time is about. Being in time has no understanding of works of art because it has no understanding of styles of culture. I said that last time. It's only got the sort of shared activities, beliefs, values, techniques, and you can add equipment and roles and so forth. But now comes his version. On the other hand, it denotes some sort of element in the constellation, the concrete puzzle solution, employed as models or examples. These are he's trying to find other words, which can replace explicit rules as a basis for the solution of the remaining puzzle. The first sense of the term, call it sociological, so forth, but mainly, and paradigms are these examples, exemplary past achievements. Philosophically, this second sense of paradigm is the deeper of the two. That's very interesting. I mean, why is that the deeper of the two? Well, you ought to have this feeling because it focuses and stabilizes and makes scared and thereby gives the power to what is otherwise just a dispersed bunch of shared behavior. So now I'm going to come back to Kuhn later because he's got lots of interesting things to say about paradigms that illustrate some of the obscure things that Heidegger has to say about works of art. But I don't want to come back to him now. I want to go on. But I think we're now plunging into the Heidegger book. But before we do, it's a moment to stop and see if anybody has anything they want to say about this. Yeah. Well, say something, and I'll tell you whether we should talk about it. Okay. I'll say this much for everybody. Das Man is code in Heideggerian for the social norms, like distance you have to stand from people, and that you should eat with your fork and not your knife, and so forth. Well, the answer is something like, yeah, in the end, of course, the social norms embody the style, as Bourdieu mentions when he talks about how you stand and how you eat, how you talk, and all that is certainly part of the style. But Heidegger doesn't know that. He talks about it more on the level of just sort of any culture will have to have some rules about when to eat, what to eat, how to eat, and so forth. He doesn't see that the norms embody the style. So you're right. It's sort of implicit in being in time. He just hasn't got it yet. He hasn't got it. Why does he not see the different that the norms are, as I put it last time, coordinated in such a way as to open up a different sort of world in different cultures at different times? Yeah.
Is he actually endorsing the phenomenon as something that's positive within culture, or is he just recognizing that?
He's endorsing it as positive because, have I said this yet? Seems to me I have, but I don't see why. Maybe I haven't. But have I talked about what I call meaningful differences? It seems to me I did, didn't I? Did I? Yeah, in what connection? Why? Oh, yeah, but I mean, not today, but I mean last time. Did I? Yes, of course. That's it. I said, yes, when I was giving the Japanese baby as an example of style, remember I said the style lets things show up as something, and it lets people show up as something, and it has in it the meaningful differences. That is, what is worth doing and what is not. Distinctions of worthiness, I call them, qualitative distinctions. So Heidegger is saying, and we'll get to that in a minute, you're just jumping ahead, it's very important. He is not only describing it, he's endorsing it. It's a very positive function that a culture has got to have these, or it won't have distinctions of worthiness. That's where they are held up to people. Yeah.
Wouldn't you say there's sort of a dance between the culture and its individuals, and then the culture affects the individuals and how they can show up, and the individuals in turn, like Marilyn Monroe, affect the cultures? There's a sort of interplay.
Absolutely. The work, to talk Heidegger jargon, the work of art needs the preservers. The preservers are all, in this case, the women who are imitating Marilyn Monroe, and the preservers need the work of art. They wouldn't have something to imitate if they didn't have the work of art. Yes, they go back and forth, and you need both of them. Yeah.
Concentrate more on, like, I don't know if it's all of that was taught by the work of art.
You wouldn't.
Now, like, but you might call it the Greek temple work of art.
You would.
But there's something about one of the pre-building built up church. All these pre-buildings, the organized balances of population in order to reflect.
Well, it's interesting what you're raising. There's so many interesting questions. If you thought that the builders of the Greek temple were important in some way and had some kind of plan, then you could say, well, it's been built according to that plan by these builders. But Heidegger wants to play that down. That's one reason he takes the Greek temple. I mean, we don't know who made them, and they sort of grew up by presumably the community, each one contributing their own skills. Somebody must have had some overall plan, but it's not something that plays a big role in Heidegger's understanding. When he talks about this, his funny way of talking is what makes the work of art is not the artist, but art, which means, roughly, that what's really important is that whoever made the temple, they were responding to something that was going on in the culture, and that was what was important. So it isn't, you're on a track, but that's not the right piece of the track. I mean, that's not the important difference for Heidegger between the cockfight and the temple.
That logic doesn't totally have written these on pen that is cultural.
In a way, Hölderlin is, Hölderlin is special. We don't want to get too far into this. He is an artist in a needy time, responding to the breakdown of a culture, so that the culture isn't simply calling him to articulate its meaningful differences and its gods, because they're gone. So I think once there's a breakdown, it's even in being in time, that when people use equipment transparently, and then something breaks down, the hammer's head comes off or something, then they have to become minds, so to speak. They have to think about it, notice it, decide what to do about it. And I think that you can't take a breakdown artist as the kind of artist he wants to talk about here. You'd have to take you could write a paper on this if you want. The special character of Hölderlin, as remember the title you may know is that one of the essays on Hölderlin is what is it? I think Dichter im dürftige Zeit, a poet in a needy time, when the gods have fled, so forth. So, but let me follow up your question one direction. Can anybody figure out yet? I would be surprised and almost upset. What is the crucial difference between the temple and the cockfight? I doubt if it's clear yet. Implicit in things, yeah.
Well, the cockfight is something that's alive and
That's a difference, but it's not the right kind of difference. A difference in function in the culture. There's something that the temple does that the cockfight can't do. It makes a big difference, and Geertz doesn't see it very clearly. He doesn't see it. He doesn't see that it's important. Heidegger thinks it's very important. Yeah. Under that general description, yes, but what difference? What's the important difference? They both articulate. They both focus. They hold up to the people what they're up to. They educate their sentiments, and they promote and stabilize and the style. Those functions are all the same. But I've covered up the difference the way I put it. Yeah.
Doesn't the temple have a certain amount kind of authority with it?
Well, so does the cockfight. I mean, the big authority. I mean, the men have to do what the cockfight requires of them, and so forth. We'll put it aside. I don't really want you to answer now, and I'd be upset if you answered it yet. But, Liz, you want to say something?
I was going to say
Okay. Then let me go on. Okay, we're ready, and now you will get the answer to this. If you hear something, if you listen to this, what I'm going to read, right in it is the answer to the question we were just asking. We're ready to jump to Heidegger, and we've already jumped to the Greek temple in a way. For Heidegger, the Greek temple is, so to speak, a paradigm. It's a very, very good example of a work of art doing what works of art do when they function in their very special way, at their best. And he also likes to pick it because it's certainly not representational. You can't say, you might think that a tragedy is an imitation of an action or a representation of an action. Aristotle did. So much the worse for Aristotle, Heidegger would say, who in general likes Aristotle a lot. But his play reviews are not Aristotelian at his best. Because the interesting thing about the temple is it's not a representation of anything. Obviously, what could it be a representation of? And now he's going to go and describe it. He says about it, where it's not a representation, I think, right at the beginning. Where does he say that? That's where I expect to find it. Yeah, okay, let's start there. Let's start at the bottom of 41. A building, a Greek temple, portrays nothing. It stands in the middle of the rocky valley. It encloses the figure of the god. The work of art and being a god are pretty much the same. Think about why we call Marilyn Monroe a goddess. It's the same idea, which we'll get back to. Why are they gods? They're goddesses. And it stands in the holy precinct, the god does. By means of the temple, the god is present. Never mind that for a minute. The god is an extension and delimitation of the holy precinct. Never mind all that. Let's go. Here's the crucial part now. It is the temple work that first fits together and at the same time gathers around itself the unity of those paths and relations in which birth and death, disaster and blessing, victory and disgrace, endurance and decline acquire the shape of destiny for human beings. The all-governing expanse of this open relational context is the world of this historical people. That's the central passage in the essay. That's the phenomenon that all of this is a kind of meditation on. And what do we hear? Well, that it says focuses, that is, fits together everything that's going on. It unifies what? The meaningful differences. It describes, in effect, the way that birth and death are important. Not just that they're important in any culture. That what counts as disaster and blessing, what counts as victory and disgrace, and so forth. And here comes the punch. Let's see if you can see why this is important. The all-governing expanse of this open relational context is the world of this historical people. How did we just go beyond cockfights? Yeah. Yes, but that's the function of the other part of it. That's the result. Yeah. Yeah.
That will protect the world people.
It's what?
That will protect the world people.
Yes, but it's not the difference between that and the cockfight. Yeah. No, that's the temple is there but dead, Heidegger will say. He says it's nice to go and look at the temple, but it's not an artwork working anymore. No, I mean, this is so obvious, I think that you just don't see it. But it's important to me, and it's important to Heidegger. Namely, it's the all-governing expanse. It's the world. I mean, the thing about the cockfight is, and Geertz was hedging it, he says it's only for men. And he says some aspects of their sensibility. They don't have a unified understanding of being. There isn't any work of art for the Balinese that holds up to them their unified style, because they don't have a unified style. They don't have a work of art, and because they don't have a work of art, they don't have a unified style. And what the women presumably also have their ritual. I think it's weaving in Bali, but I'm not sure. It is in the Berber culture that Bourdieu talks a lot about. But in any case, they'll have their story. So there'll be two understandings of being, two understandings of what it is to be a human being, and what sort of objects show up as valuable, and what are the meaningful differences. And the interesting thing about the temple, and remember I said last time, it only starts in our culture, and it only starts in 500 BC, that there is something which expresses the style of the whole culture, that it has a unified understanding of being. That's what's special. Yeah.
I guess the problem I'm having with that is you've got like some egalitarian fantasy that you have about this society. I mean, but it's cultural anthropology degree, yes, this did incorporate women, did incorporate the whole society.
Ah, interesting about women. Yeah, really.
I mean, so the Greeks had slaves, right?
Yeah.
Anybody physically present in the area, right, count their lives. Of the world.
Well, I think these are good questions. Suppose we said that it even defines what counts as a bull and a cricket, he says at one point. I mean, apparently at this level of describing the understanding of being, remember, as something like whooshing up and lingering and going away, and maybe having very clear outlines while it lingers. And you have to sort of read Homer and Aeschylus and try to get a feel for it. It might well be that at that level of generality, he thinks it includes slaves and women too. I think he does. I think that's what it is about an understanding of being.
But then it becomes less clear why the cockfights don't include.
Oh, no, it's not. I mean, it's a question of competition, of who's going to win and destroy the other one and so forth. It's too concrete. I mean, that's not about weaving. That's not about nurturing. I mean, it's as if there's an aggressive ritual and a nurturing ritual, and could be all 100% aggressive cultures. We might be one. And there could be 100% nurturing cultures. The Japanese on the story I told you might be one. But Heidegger thinks, and when there is one, he doesn't think the Japanese are one, but I mean, when there is one, then there can be something that holds up that style. Now, I don't know whether he thinks, back to you, I don't know whether he thinks that the women, I think, and the slaves and the crickets and the bulls and everything shows up in this style. That could be wrong. It doesn't much matter, I think, whether it's wrong. I have to think about this, because he knows that there could be things that fall outside it, and because there's a struggle to bring them in. We'll read about that. But it is very important to him that the Greeks had a unified style. We're going to say one more thing. And that doesn't seem to be just a Heideggerian idea, because, and I gather from talking to Paul Rabenel and people in anthropology, that it's generally agreed that the West is a peculiar kind of culture, which is called a hot culture, which, as opposed to a cold culture, a hot culture has a history, where a history, of course, can't be just a bunch of events, because there are plenty of cultures that have events. The Chinese had, about 3,000 years of events, which they carefully kept track of, and dynasties and so forth. A hot culture is one where the whole understanding of what it is to be, in Heidegger jargon, or what reality, changes every once in a while. And there have to be at least some dominant general understanding of what it is to be. In order for there to be history, we'll get back to history, where there can be changes of understanding of reality. Now, I think you could probably say that this dominant one might well exclude a lot of people. I'm not sure. As long as the people who matter agree that this is what matters, I think that's enough to get Heidegger history going. However, I think Heidegger does have a stronger claim because it's the understanding of being. I think he thinks that anybody that counts as being at all is going to come under this style. And you're welcome to sort of think about that and criticize it and see whether people think about how people thought about the Greeks. I mean, it will have to be just the Athenians, for instance, or at least he isn't claiming that the Spartans come under this understanding of being. It would have to be the people. How many have had philosophy 6 from me? Well, not so many. I mean, the people that Aeschylus is speaking for in when he writes his tragedy that Heidegger is referring to. But Heidegger, we just read this for a minute. At the bottom of the next, on page 43, you get another statement of this. In the tragedy, the middle of 43, in a tragedy, nothing is staged or displayed theatrically. That's where he's disagreeing with Aristotle. But the battle of the new gods against the old is being fought. The linguistic work originating in the speech of the people doesn't refer to this battle. It transforms the people's saying so that now every living word fights the battle and puts up for decision. And here come the meaningful differences again. What is holy and unholy, what is great, what is small, brave and cowardly, what is lofty and flighty, what master and what slave. Now, when the Oresteia was performed, all the Athenians were there, the men and the women. I don't know whether the slaves were there. I have no idea. But at least the women, who generally were at home, were certainly there. And it was a story about the relation of men and women, and of old gods and new gods. And it was the story that the Athenians all told themselves. And the amazing thing is, at the end of the Oresteia, the people from the audience join the actors in one scene in which they enact the formation of Athens. I mean, that's a work of art working. And that's the best example that Heidegger could have. Did I have another hand? Yeah.
So far, I just want to clarify where somehow they talk like this to do that. That would be one major.
Right. And notice the Kuhnian paradigms don't either, just to take it on. They're only for scientists. Right. Go ahead. Yeah.
When he starts talking in wow, other kinds of things that just showing it goes beyond like a fact. Somehow the content to the people. It's almost like a technical quality imaging. Talking about the objective features, something that work of art will bring out that anybody is.
Yeah. No, I don't. I think that's wrong. I'm going to try to explain why, but I'm glad you're thinking of it that way. But let me just say why that better not be right. It's too metaphysical. If he thinks that there is there's everything when Heidegger's in this stage, he's very much history oriented, and nothing important falls outside the historical. So he's going to have to say that even the earth and the colors and the sounds are going to be in the style of Greek earth and Greek colors and sounds, and the temple is going to exactly tell you what a Greek sound and color and earth and storm is like compared to a Christian one. Of course, you don't hear it that way, or compared to a Balinese one, but that's the idea, I think. Yeah. Fit in here at all. You complete loser the Van Gogh painting. Did you come in late? Okay, well, but that's wonderful. You should say that, because the Van Gogh painting is a terrible example. That's why I skipped over it. One, it doesn't hold up to the people the general thing of their style. It only shows you the peasant world and the peasant style. Secondly, it doesn't hold it up to the peasant, because the last people are going to see the Van Gogh painting of the peasant shoes are the peasants who wear those shoes. Third, it hangs in a museum, and he's quite clear that this has to be sort of performed in public if it's going to do its job. So he shouldn't be talking about those shoes. The only excuse for talking about the shoes is he says that it shows that the work of art can show you a world. It shows you the world of the peasant. But it is not, to use Heidegger jargon, a case of a work of art working. Because when a work of art working, it not only shows a world, it produces, maintains, stabilizes, articulates for the people their own world. So we're going to skip it. Let me try go on. You want to say something more, I think. Did you? Oh, no. Okay. Let me go on for a while. You'll probably find plenty more to talk about in a minute. So there's the temple, and how does it works by holding this up. I guess I have read what I want to read. Yeah, I'm going on to the next story. We've seen all the meaningful differences. You can see that it really is articulating and stabilizing the world on 44. Well, no, you can't, but you can see how, you can't see that it articulates and stabilizes the world, but you can see him talking about world. And if you start in the middle of 44, you can see it. To be a work means to set up a world. But what is it to be a world? And then, last time I tried to tell you what it was to be a world. He's going to tell you now in his own terms. He's going to build into the notion of world, of course, style now, so that it means more than it meant in being in time. But what he says about world is just wonderful. I'll read it. Wonderful to sort of give you a sense of what it is and why he thinks it's important. The world is not the mere collection of the countable or uncountable, familiar and unfamiliar things that are just there. If you need a word for that, call it the universe. The universe is the totality of stuff, the totality of what there is. That's nothing for yet. I mean, nothing in the universe is going to show up as anything until there's a world. But neither is it an imagined framework added by our representation to the sum of given things. Okay, it's not a belief system. It's not a set of categories. It's not the kind of thing that Kant and cognitivists talk about either. We talked about all that last time. He's just saying what I said last time. The world worlds. Now that's interesting. Why does he say that? Because he can't say that the world is. Because it's thanks to the world that things get whatever kind of being they've got, as created or as physis, that is whooshing up, or as objects. The world isn't created, and it isn't an object, and it isn't whooshing up. It's the understanding in the background that enables us to encounter everything as whatever, any of those things. It's more fundamental than it determines each world determines what some particular way of being. But you shouldn't think of the world as itself having a way of being. Something crossed my mind I want to say about it. I don't know. It'll come back. Now he's going to say something wrong in a minute, which I just prepared you for. He shouldn't say that the world is. He should say the world worlds or something like that. I mean, he's got to have another word for it. The understanding of being or the truth of being is more basic than, in Heidegger language, the being of beings, namely to be a creature, to be an object, and so forth. So now he says, and is more fully in being. That is wrong, I think. I can't do anything about that. He said it. I looked it up in the German because sometimes he corrects mistakes in the German. He didn't fix it. I don't know what it means. There aren't degrees of being. And the world is not more fully in being than the tangible realm. What he really wants to say is, of course, something like the world is more important and more fundamental and has a deeper function than any particular beings. But it's a bad way to put it, that it's more fully in being. If anybody can, explain why he should say it that way, I'll be glad to find out, but I can't. But it's certainly somehow, can't say more real either, you see, because reality gets changed. Reality is createdness. Reality is object. I mean, the world determines what counts as reality. So you can't say the world is more real than anything. You've got to say, the world worlds, and that's more, I would say something like more basic than anything. Remember that being is, world is that on the basis of which anything gets understood and shows up as anything. Yeah. That doesn't help me any. I just think it's just, you get what he's trying to say. He's trying to say the world is the most basic, the most important, more fundamental than any kind of entities at all, or even the general characteristic of the entities, namely their reality. It's what defines what counts as reality. Yeah. No, not yet. No, no, no. Why would you think that?
Well, it goes before everything, it doesn't have its own being.
Right. Right. But it's not because, see, they're very interesting, very interesting. The world withdraws, remember I said, because it's transparent, because it's generally in the background. That's what I wanted to talk about, was the background. I knew it would come back to. But in a minute, don't let me forget it. But the way the earth withdraws, which is what you're thinking of, is different. Because he says the earth struggles with world. And if world were earth, that wouldn't make any sense. So we got to figure, we'll get there. By the way, how many have had Searle when he talks about the background in any course? Well, then I should relate this to that. It's when I talked about how there are some kind of practices which are there and have to be in place before we can relate to anything. In Searle language, we couldn't have any intentionality. We couldn't be directed toward objects under aspects. We couldn't have action. There wouldn't be any us if it weren't for the background. And he even says about the background that it's something that we don't have a normal language for because we never have to deal with it. It has to be in place before we deal with things. We don't have a skill for dealing with the background. It's our collection of skills for dealing with people and things. He's got a very Heideggerian feel for the background. Its importance, and that it's invisible and withdraws, and that philosophers have never talked about it. Searle talks about that. Now it makes philosophers nervous when he brings it up. Yeah. Well, I certainly know the name Michel Serres, but I've never read anything by him. No, we don't, and they haven't, so it won't help. But I have this common thing with Searle, so we could bring that out. It was after we gave seminars together on Heidegger that Searle came up with the background. I mean, it isn't as if it's Heidegger, it's his own sort of version, but it's somehow related to that. Anyway, so let's go on. Now, let's see here. Okay, so we just read about the world. Let's go on finishing this. The world is never an object that stands before us and can be seen. World is the ever non-objective to which we are subject as long, that is, governed, as he puts it governs the paths of destiny. We're subject to it, remember, because world determines what it makes sense to do. In that sense, world governs what we do. I mean, we do what masculine and feminine people do in our culture. We can't do what masculine and feminine people do in the Bali culture. We can't, to take an extreme example, commit hara-kiri. It's not something that makes sense for us to do. It makes sense in the traditional Japanese world. So we're governed by the world setting out the paths of destiny, what it makes sense for people to do. We are subject as long as the paths of birth and death, blessing and curse, keep us transported into being. I think that I've written in here that's a translation of Dasein, Da-Sein, which Heidegger writes when he wants to talk about, sometimes that's another name for the clearing or the open. Wherever those decisions of our history that relate to our way of being, our very being, are made, are taken up, abandoned, or go unrecognized and are rediscovered by new inquiry, there the world whirls. So that's clear, and I think they're pretty amazingly clear. And what does the world do? Well, remember I said it's what lets everything show up as anything. Heidegger puts this, I just want to read this on 43, back to the temple. The first paragraph on 43. The temple in its standing there first gives the things their look and commend their outlook on themselves. Remember that's I said the style of the culture lets things show up as anything and lets us show up as anything. That's another way Heidegger puts it. And now we're getting a little further. And the work of art shines. That's a new angle. We've had it in the background. But why does he say that it shines? Well, he does say that on 44. He talks here about its splendor and about 5 lines down. Dignity and splendor are not properties beside and behind which the God who stands as something distinct, but rather in the dignity and the splendor that the God is present. I have to read you where the God and the temple come together. In the reflected glory of this splendor, there glows, that is, there lightens itself what we call the world. Now, where is the God? Oh, on 43, prepared me for this, right before the stuff I read about the tragedy. Right after the temple, I should have just gone on, gives men their outlook on themselves. This view remains open as long as the work is a work, as long as the God is not fled from it. Remember that when the temple can lie or be around for another 1,000 years, but it's not a work of art anymore, in Heidegger's talk, when it's not working. And it's not working when the Greek world is dead, and there is no world for it to articulate anymore. And then the God is fled from it. It's the same with the sculptor of the God and so forth. It's not a portrait. We're back to that again. It is the work that lets the God himself be present, and thus is the God himself. So now we're ready to say, why does he think the work of art is a God? Well, I think it's very interesting why he says that. Because God is supposed to be what creates everything and makes it intelligent. Well, that's now gone over to the job of the temple. The temple lets anything be anything and makes us able to see it as anything. So the temple is like a non-metaphysical, non-ontotheological God. It takes over the functions of in Heidegger's thinking, the temple was the original, so to speak, God. It's the metaphysicians and the Judeo-Christians who made the mistake of thinking that God had to be universal, eternal, outside the world to ground intelligibility and make anything be anything. But Heidegger says, no, at the beginning, when it started, that there was some one thing that grounded all intelligibility and made anything be anything. It was the temple, not the good, as in Plato, or the creator God. So the temple and the God are pretty much the same thing. And the God shines, or the temple shines. Why does he say that? Took me a long time to figure that out. He says in the appendix that what we call beauty in the work of art is really the shining of it. Well, you can't think that at night, the Greek temple before there was sun and lumiere and tourists was lit up. That can't be what it means for it to shine. Well, what is it? Well, I gave you really my hint of it in Marilyn Monroe, who is a goddess. What does it mean for her to shine and be a star? Well, it means that we see things in the light of it. If you hold on to that phrase, you can understand it. The work of art of the God is what we are able to see ourselves and everything else in the light of. That is, by glamorizing in such a clear way that we can all see it, and all see that we all see it. We can see ourselves and everybody else and everything else in terms of it. So we see everything in the light of it, therefore we say it shines. That's, at least as I think, after many years of worrying about why it shines, is the right answer to that. He talks about it again on page 64, just mentions the shining of truth. And I didn't look it up, but it does say beauty equals shining, doesn't he, in the appendix, or did I just make that up? I think he does. Are there two appendices? Yes, somewhere there's something about beauty and shining. Anybody find it? Maybe I made it up. He says that somewhere earlier? Aletheia, he talks about. Okay. Let's try it. Do you talk about beauty?
The being of the being.
Great. That's terrific. But did he say, yeah, until the beauty of the beautiful, right. That's what I should be quoting. Let me write it down.
It says being of being comes into the steadiness of its shining.
That's right. That's the quote I need. I'm going to.
The last sentence of the full second paragraph.
Yeah, I got it. I see that. But everybody else should see it. Yeah, the last sentence of the second paragraph. And then the nature of art would be the truth of being setting itself to work. Until now, art presumably has to do with the beautiful and beauty, and not with truth. But in fact, what they're really talking about when they talk about beauty, it turns out, I'm now reading into it, is this shining. Maybe, I'm sure that's what I had in mind, and I don't know how I ever lost the crucial quote. But now we've got it back. Okay. So, it's as if you ask how you can see the light in the room. Well, you can see the light in the room if there's some light bulb, so to speak, that's shiny and is such a kind of clear manifestation of the style. I'm trying to mix these sort of metaphors. If you can see it, and then you can have a sense of what this background style is. That's the idea. And so it can be, I wrote down here now like a god. I'm just doing things in a different order. Let me catch up with myself. I think I read that right. But notice then, I want to say, but it's not eternal. He's very clear, not outside the world. You should read that. The bottom of 40. I'm trying to show you how the work of art is like a god, but Heidegger's gods can die. It's not eternal. You don't have to be a god for Heidegger. It's a mistake to think that gods have to be eternal and universal. And that's just not their job description. At the bottom of 40, the Aegina sculptures in the Munich collection, Sophocles' Antigone in the best edition, are, as the works they are, torn out of their own native sphere. However high their quality and so forth, placing them in a collection has withdrawn them from their world. Remember that's what's wrong with the Van Gogh shoes, I just wanted to say. But even when we make an effort to cancel or avoid such displacement, when we visit the temple in Kestem, that's the one Heidegger visited. A beautiful temple. I have a picture of it in my office. I've visited it twice. You can really see, you can almost feel what it was like to have the gods present, but of course they're not present anymore, so that's kind of sentimental. And Heidegger agrees. When we visit the temple in Kestem at its own site, or the Bamberg Cathedral, the world of the work that stands there has perished. And then they cannot be undone. And that's just part of what it is to be a work of art. It's sort of like Thusis, it occurs to me. A work of art comes around, lingers, and goes out of being. That's how things are. It belongs in the Thusis period that it was discovered, I guess. So let's see now. One more way of putting it on page 61. Be very careful about this. In the bottom paragraph. By the way, truth is another name. We'll get back to truth, but I better say something about it right now. Heidegger, I better talk a lot about truth right now, because I can't talk about what I want to talk about unless I do. So, truth, where's the Aletheia passage? I might as well read it now.
It's on 36.
Go back to 36. Boy, a lot of stuff happened before the temple okay, let's go back there. So the Greeks talked about aletheia, unconcealing. We say truth, and so forth. Well, when you hear Heidegger talking about truth, you mustn't think of truth as correspondence, as we do now. He thinks that's a very derivative form of truth, where, I say, there is a lectern on this table, and this is true if there is a lectern on this, if and only if there's a lectern on the table. Or I say there are 60 people in the room, and then we can count them and see if that's true or not, whether it corresponds. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. And Heidegger thinks that that's certainly one of the ways we use the word truth, but he thinks that there's a more fundamental kind of truth, which is that there's a world at all, so that desks and lecterns and students can show up and be counted and correspond to something. It's like Kuhn saying that it isn't that Newton and Aristotle claims are true when they correspond to reality. But what reality is for Aristotle and what reality is for Newton is different. And before you have an understanding of reality, you can't make truth claims at all. It isn't as if there were just states of affairs out there in the universe, and we made propositions that correspond to them. Sort of Davidson and Heidegger agree that's not the right way to think about truth. But then Heidegger, unlike Davidson, and misleadingly, unfortunately, decides to call the open or the clearing or the world, which makes possible propositions that correspond, that makes possible ordinary truth in a deeper sense. And so he says, look, the Greeks understood this. They had this word aletheia, which means unconcealing. Lethe is forgetting. It's the river, like the river Lethe. And aletheia is a negative, so it's unforgetting. So he translates it unconcealing. And he says, then that means disclosing. So there has to be a world disclosed before there can be any truth claim. And then Heidegger has this weird view in Being in Time already, that if something is the condition of the possibility of something else, you can name the condition of the possibility with the same meaning as what it's the possibility of. So if aletheia is the condition of the possibility of truth claims, disclosing, then you ought to be able to call disclosing truth too, because because that's what it means. And that's very misleading and confusing. And now let me say two things. He regretted it for two reasons. I mean, aletheia is fine and disclosing is fine, but calling it truth is not a good idea because we've already got a use for the word truth. He regretted it, one, because it was confusing, and two, because he claimed that the Greeks didn't have a correspondence theory of truth at first. They only had truth as disclosing in Homer. And then some classicists made him eat his words and showed that in Homer, truth already meant correspondence. So Heidegger sort of gulped and took it back and said, well, that's what they should have said. And so, that is, they should have said the more primordial truth is aletheia. But we don't care about, we have to use his word because otherwise we won't be able to read. So whenever he says truth, like the truth of being, I wrote on the board, remember, like understanding of being, the truth of being is a name for worlds or disclosing the opening that makes it possible to encounter anything. And now, I said all this because there was something I couldn't say until I got there.
That's something to do with page 61.
They did it. Well, thank you. Let's go to page 61 and find out. What?
That was the one.
36 is what I was just explaining, right? Well, I think so. But I'll read it. Maybe you're right. I should read it on 36 first. The Greeks called the unconcealedness of beings aletheia. We say truth, that is translating it, and think little enough in using the word. If there occurs in the work a disclosure of a particular being, disclosing what and how it is, then there is a happening of truth at work. So now it's going to be, he's going to say, that in a work of art, truth sets to work. That, skip a little. The nature of art then would be this: the truth of being setting itself to work. That means, that's just another name for art opens up a world. Now, let's look at 61, because it was because I was there or somewhere around there that I got into this. At the bottom of 61. I had to explain why he says truth does not exist. It's about 15 lines from the bottom. In itself, beforehand, somewhere among the stars, only later to descend among beings. This is impossible for reason alone. It is, after all, only the openness of beings that first affords the possibility of somewhere in a place filled by present beings. Clearing our openness and establishing that we open belong together and so forth. So, in other words, you couldn't have any kind of truth of the normal sort if you didn't have this more basic kind of truth. But this more basic kind of truth doesn't exist in Plato's heaven of true propositions or true states of affairs. It only exists insofar as there are human beings and practices and works of art and equipment and all of this which preserves and opens up and preserves the world. And then he comes back to the same phrase. What he's now going to tell you, but we're not going to get there today, various ways the truth establishes itself. He's going to generalize from a work of art to all those other sorts of entities and events that also focus a culture. But I guess I could jump to that, given that I have 3 more minutes. I think I will. Okay, so let's do it that way. At the top of 62, he says, truth establishes itself in the beings it has opened up, truth setting itself to work. And then he gives you a list. This is, again, a good place to end and go back to the beginning. This is now he's finally worked himself around in his Art Academy lecture to what he really wants to talk about, which isn't art at all. It's something much more basic. It's the various ways that worlds are opened up and stabilized. And so he gives you a list. Truth occurs in the act that founds a political state. That might be Hitler, and probably might well be what he had in mind, but it could, of course, also be the Constitution of the United States. It doesn't necessarily, it isn't always a bad thing. Still, another way in which truth comes to shine forth is the nearness of that which is not simply a being, but the being that is most of all. That means God. I take it that means perhaps Jesus, for instance. There's a God who is who is establishing a truth. Another way truth grounds itself is the essential sacrifice. I take that means martyrs, but he doesn't say much about that. Maybe Martin Luther King or Gandhi or something like that. People who show that something is worth dying for, and namely some whole understanding of what it is to be. He's very brief about these things. Still, another way in which truth becomes is the thinker's questioning, which is the thinking of being, names being in its question worthiness. That's interesting. So among the list of the ways truth sets itself to work, we get philosophers, because philosophers name beings. Parmenides and Heraclitus say thesis. And then Plato, well, never mind Plato, we better jump up to the medievals who say created stuff, ens creatum in Latin, I think. And then Aristotle names the New World into being when he says subjects and objects. So thinkers, and Kant sort of nails that world when he articulates it as autonomy and maturity, modernity. So thinkers have this important job of finding a language in which to focus, articulate, and stabilize understandings of being. So now we've gone all the way from Geertz's glimmers about rituals to Heidegger's understanding about temples to Heidegger's generalization to all those entities that perform a certain function, namely to open up and stabilize a world. We've got lots to talk about. Earth, for instance, which keeps coming up, right? What's that? What's for Tuesday? Finish reading the essay for Tuesday. We're going to do Earth and World and the end of the essay.